If you were to place a human skeleton directly alongside that of any other primate on this planet, you would find yourself staring at a profound architectural mystery, because tucked inside our lower torso is a digestive system that is astonishingly small, compact, and structurally inadequate for an animal of our mass, yet sitting right on top of our spine is a massive, hyperactive brain that consumes a staggering 20% of our entire daily energy budget, despite making up a mere 2% of our total body weight, a glaring metabolic contradiction that completely violates the standard biological ledger of nature. In the unforgiving world of evolution, internal organs are incredibly expensive properties to maintain, with the liver, the kidneys, the digestive tract constantly fighting over resources, meaning that you simply cannot expand one major organ without systematically shrinking another to keep the budget balanced. No other wild mammal has ever managed to pull off this specific, lopsided anatomical trade-off, because a massive, complex brain requires a constant stream of high-density fuel, while a small, shortened gut is physically incapable of processing the massive volume of raw, fibrous vegetation that fuels the rest of the primate world. The mathematics of natural selection simply do not add up, meaning that something had to violently break the rules of biology to make us this way, and the answer isn't the invention of a deadlier spear, the shaping of a wheel, or even the birth of complex language. It is a simple, transformative piece of everyday technology that sits in your kitchen right now, a tool we use so casually that we have completely forgotten how it fundamentally altered the course of our genetic history. To truly appreciate just how deeply this ancient technology is written into our very DNA, we have to look at what happens when modern human beings attempt to reject it entirely. Because when scientists conducted extensive long-term studies on strict raw food dieters, people who deliberately choose to consume only uncooked materials by choice while having unlimited access to modern grocery stores filled with fruits, nuts, and vegetables, uncovered a harsh biological reality that the modern raw food movement rarely likes to publicize. These studies revealed that a massive, statistically significant percentage of strict raw foodists experience severe chronic energy deficiencies, suffering from persistent weight loss over time. And among the women in the study, specifically, a shocking proportion completely stop ovulating, experiencing irregular or entirely absent menstrual cycles, which is the body's ultimate emergency defense mechanism when it realizes it is entering a state of prolonged starvation and can no longer afford to support the massive energy demands of reproduction. Keep in mind, these aren't ancient people struggling to survive a lean winter in the wilderness. These are modern humans living in wealthy societies, surrounded by an absolute abundance of food, with full access to high-calorie nuts, domestic fruits, highly cultivated vegetables, and even raw meat or dairy, if they choose it, eating as much volume as their stomachs can physically hold. Yet, despite their best efforts, their modern, highly evolved digestive systems still cannot reliably extract enough usable calories from raw food alone to maintain basic weight and normal reproductive health, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that human beings are obligate cooks, a unique biological anomaly that has permanently lost the physical equipment required to thrive on what nature provides raw, meaning that if you were to drop a modern human into a wild forest without fire, they would slowly, inevitably starve, even if they were surrounded by an absolute paradise of raw vegetation. Our closest living evolutionary cousins do not suffer from this structural limitation because a chimpanzee dropped into the deepest wilderness can survive and multiply indefinitely on a diet consisting entirely of raw leaves, stems, bitter roots, and the occasional raw animal catch, but maintaining that raw existence requires a massive, non-stop sacrifice of their waking life. Anthropologists and primatologists who have spent years in the field meticulously tracking the daily habits of wild chimpanzees have discovered something truly startling. An adult chimp spent roughly 6 hours of every single day doing absolutely nothing but chewing, constantly grinding their jaws back and forth to crush tough, fibrous, calorie-poor plant matter into a fine paste, a grueling physical process that is absolutely necessary so that their massive, heavy, energy-expensive digestive tracts can slowly ferment and extract enough microscopic fuel to keep their bodies moving. This endless daily chewing marathon requires an immense anatomical investment, including massive jaw muscles that anchor high up on the skull, thick tooth enamel that can withstand a lifetime of continuous grinding, and a protruding, heavy abdomen designed to house yards of complex, slow-moving intestines, leaving the chimpanzee with very little free time or spare metabolic energy for anything else. Now, contrast that grueling schedule with your own daily routine, where a modern human eating a standard cooked diet spends an average of less than 1 single hour per day chewing their food, a monumental efficiency upgrade that suddenly hands our species a massive 5-hour daily surplus of waking time that simply did not exist for any other primate on Earth, a literal gift of time that allowed us to stop focusing entirely on survival and start dedicating our lives to creation, technology, and thought. This vast divergence in time and anatomy is what led a brilliant primatologist named Richard Wrangham to propose one of the most provocative and fiercely debated ideas in modern anthropology, the radical hypothesis that cooking did not simply alter our diet somewhere along the way, but that cooking is the definitive reason we became human. In the first place, because at its core, the act of applying fire to food is nothing less than a form of predigestion carried out entirely outside the body. When you expose raw food to the intense thermal energy of a flame, you are using external heat to do the incredibly heavy structural work that would otherwise require hours of violent mechanical chewing and massive amounts of internal stomach acid. The heat of a cooking fire violently ruptures the tough, highly resilient cell walls of wild plants, instantly unlocking dense pockets of starches and sugars that would otherwise pass completely through your digestive system, undigested and wasted. Simultaneously, the heat triggers a process called denaturation, forcing the tightly coiled, complex structures of raw proteins to completely unravel and spread out, which allows your internal digestive enzymes to rapidly step in and dismantle them with minimal effort, explaining why the human body can extract significantly more net energy from a cooked egg or a roasted piece of meat than an uncooked version, even though the physical size and raw weight of the food have not changed at all. Furthermore, starches undergo gelatinization when heated, transforming from hard, crystalline, stubborn structures into a soft, easily absorbable gel that your body can convert into pure glucose almost instantly, meaning that the invention of fire essentially allowed our ancestors to outsource the most exhausting parts of their metabolism to the landscape around them. But long before ancient humans understood a single thing about metabolic ledgers, calories, or gut biology, basic organic chemistry provided them with an irresistible, highly addictive incentive to keep their fires burning every single night, and that incentive was flavor. The moment intense heat hits raw proteins and sugars together, it ignites a spectacular chemical chain reaction discovered by Louis Camille Maillard, the exact process that is responsible for the beautiful browning and rich, complex aromas of seared meat, toasted seeds, and roasted roots. This Maillard reaction produces hundreds of entirely new, complex flavor compounds that in season simply do not exist anywhere in the raw, natural world. And neuroscience research on food reward pathways shows that these specific aromas activate the brain's dopamine channels far more aggressively than their raw counterparts, meaning that our ancestors were chasing a massive sensory reward time they roasted their food, but fire offered an even deeper evolutionary advantage by acting as a universal chemical shield against the hidden dangers of the wild. Many of the most abundant, energy-dense plants in nature are actually mildly to seriously toxic in their raw states, like the cassava root, which sits as a vital staple food for millions of people today, but contains cyanogenic glycosides that release lethal doses of pure cyanide into your system if eaten raw, or the common kidney bean, which is packed with a defensive protein called phytohemagglutinin that binds to the gut lining and induces violent, exhausting illness from just a small handful of uncooked beans. Cooking completely dismantles and neutralizes these chemical defenses, instantly transforming dangerous, toxic landscapes into a massive, open buffet of safe, storable starches and radically expanding the geographic territories that human beings could successfully colonize. This massive, permanent influx of easily accessible, highly concentrated energy is what permanently allowed the human body to pull off its greatest evolutionary heist, because as our ancestors adopted this pre-digested diet, the massive energy-hungry digestive tract became an obsolete burden, allowing the gut to slowly shrink over thousands of generations into the small, compact system we carry today. This biological downsizing freed up an enormous amount of metabolic capital. And according to the expensive tissue hypothesis, our species funneled that sudden surplus of energy directly into expanding the size and complexity of our brains, allowing a 3-pound organ to comfortably burn through 20% of our energy while the rest of our body functions smoothly. This profound architectural trade-off left an undeniable mark on our skeletal history, resulting in a face that dropped its heavy brow ridges, a jaw that lost its massive crushing power, and teeth that shrank to a fraction of their ancestral size. And if you look closely at the fossil record, you can actually see the evidence of this dietary revolution preserved on a microscopic level. When researchers placed the fossilized molars of ancient hominins under high-powered electron microscopes, they look for distinctive wear signatures. Because a lifetime of grinding through raw, fibrous vegetation, the enamel covered in deep, parallel scratches and heavy, irregular pits, whereas a diet of soft, processed, or cooked food leaves a noticeable, smoother, milder wear pattern. When scientists analyzed the teeth of early Homo erectus specimens, they discovered a surprisingly gentle, clean enamel signature, a subtle, microscopic clue suggesting that something in their environment was already systematically softening their food long before the earliest undisputed rock-lined fireplaces appear in the dirt. And this is the exact point where the narrative takes a sharp, maddening turn, because if cooking was truly the primary evolutionary engine that reshaped the human body and grew our massive brains, then the archaeological timeline should align flawlessly with the fossil record, but it doesn't. And this massive discrepancy has sparked a fierce, ongoing civil war among modern anthropologists. The sweeping physical transformations, the sudden shrinkage of the jaw, the reduction of the molars, the compression of the torso, and the dramatic explosion in brain capacity, all burst onto the evolutionary scene roughly 1.9 million years ago with the sudden, highly successful emergence of Homo erectus. This anatomical leap should be the ultimate smoking gun for the cooking hypothesis, except for one incredibly frustrating problem. Archaeologists who spend their lives digging through the deep layers of the earth searching for the actual physical remains of controlled fire, such as ancient charcoal deposits, preserved ash layers, and heat-reddened stone tools, keep hitting a massive archaeological brick wall. The clearest, most conservative, and entirely undisputed evidence for routine, everyday fire control and habitual cooking hearths does not reliably show up in the archaeological record until around 400,000 years ago, leaving a staggering, unexplained gap of 1.5 million years where a species was supposedly being structurally transformed by the power of cooked food, yet left behind almost no definitive proof that they actually knew how to build a fire. How do we explain a 1.5 million year gap in our own origin story? It is an intellectual puzzle that divides the scientific community into fiercely opposing camps, with some researchers arguing that our ancestors were managing fire far earlier than the conservative estimates allow, pointing to a tiny handful of deeply ancient, highly controversial sites scattered across the globe. One of the primary battlegrounds is Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where scientists digging deep into the subterranean dark discovered microstratified layers of trust, ash, and tiny fragments of burned bone buried in sediment that dates back roughly 1 million years, suggesting that early hominins were deliberately maintaining a fire inside the shelter of the cave. An even older, more heavily contested site is Kubi Fora in Kenya, where researchers uncover patches of deeply baked, orange-red earth dating back an astonishing 1.5 million years, which some anthropologists claim are the ancient remains of Homo erectus campfires, but critics push back aggressively against these early dates, pointing out that natural disasters like lightning strikes, intense bushfires, and volcanic activity can easily leave behind identical patches of baked earth. And ash, meaning that trying to prove a million-year-old layer of charcoal was built by a human ancestor rather than a random wildfire, is a maddeningly difficult task that cannot be solved with total certainty. To bridge this massive timeline chasm, some scientists have proposed a brilliant middle ground theory that completely redefines our early relationship with fire, suggesting that for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone ever figured out how to strike a spark from flint or rub two sticks together, human ancestors were exploiting fire passively. Wildfires were a constant, terrifying reality on the ancient African savanna, ignited regularly by lightning strikes during the dry season. And in the devastating wake of these blazes, the landscape was left completely transformed and filled with a sudden, miraculous feast. Early hominins, driven by their expanding intelligence, may have learned to stop running away from the smoke and start running toward it, stepping onto the still smoldering ground to discover the roasted carcasses of birds, lizards, and small mammals that had been caught in the flames, along with wild starchy tubers that had been baked perfectly underground by the passing heat. This passive, opportunistic scavenging would mean that cooked food entered the human diet long before we ever learned to master the flame, acting as a lucky, natural windfall that began shrinking our jaws and expanding our brains for over 1 million years, while the actual technological skill of capturing, maintaining, and generating fire arrived much later down the line as a way to secure that cooked advantage on demand rather than waiting around for the next lightning strike. But the critics of the cooking hypothesis hold another powerful card in this debate, because a powerful counterargument suggests that fire might not have been necessary at all during those early evolutionary stages, with many prominent researchers arguing that a simple shift toward eating more raw meat could explain the physical transformations of Homo erectus without requiring cooking, since raw animal flesh is considerably denser in calories and vastly easier for a primate digestive tract to break down than raw, fibrous savanna plants. Under this counter theory, the invention of simple stone tools allowed early humans to mechanically process their food long before it reached their mouths, using stone to slice meat, smash open bones for marrow, and pound tough vegetation into a soft mash, essentially performing a non-thermal version of predigestion that allowed the gut to shrink and the brain to grow, meaning that cooking arrived much later as a cultural refinement rather than the original evolutionary catalyst that created our genus. Yet, just when the raw meat argument seems to gain the upper hand, the dirt of the earth drops another bombshell, because newer, highly advanced excavation techniques keep pushing the definitive timeline of fire further back into the past, refusing to let the debate settle. The most remarkable evidence comes from a waterlogged, beautifully preserved site, Israel called Gesher Benot Yaakov, where researchers uncovered clear clusters of burnt flint fragments and charred wood seeds that date back roughly 790,000 years, a discovery that pushed the accepted date for habitual fire use significantly further back into the past. But the true breakthrough came when scientists analyzed the fossilized remains of ancient fish teeth found at the site, using highly advanced tools to look at the microscopic arrangement of the minerals inside the enamel. They discovered that the crystal structure of these ancient fish teeth had been permanently altered by exposure to a very specific moderate range of heat, exactly the temperatures required to gently bake or roast a fish, rather than the intense, destructive, scorching heat that occurs when an animal is accidentally incinerated in a chaotic forest fire, providing the earliest definitive proof of organized, repeated cooking behavior deep in our evolutionary past, and showing that every time our detection tools get sharper, the timeline of human fire control creeps closer to the anatomy of Homo erectus, as our ancestors slowly mastered the flame and transitioned into a life centered around the hearth. This new technology did something far more profound than just changing our physical shapes. It completely rewired human society and laid the foundations for human culture. Think about the unique logistical demands of a cooking fire, because unlike a raw food gatherer, who can simply eat berries or roots the exact second they find them in the bush, a cook must harvest the food, carry it back to a central location, gather fuel, tend the flame for hours, and wait patiently for the meal to be ready. A piece of rich fat or meat, slowly roasting over an open campfire, is an incredibly tempting, highly concentrated, and entirely defenseless target for any larger primate, rival tribe member, or predator willing to use violence to steal it. And Richard Wrangham argued that this constant vulnerability fundamentally reshaped human relationships. It forced early humans to invent complex social contracts, group norms, and strict pair bonding arrangements specifically to defend the hearth from theft, creating a wonderfully unromantic origin story for domestic life, where partnership wasn't born out of love at first sight, but out of a desperate need to ensure that someone was guarding the roasted tubers while you weren't looking. And when the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the dangerous prehistoric wilderness was swallowed by total darkness, the cooking fire provided one final monumental gift: usable light after dark, a resource that stretched the boundaries of the day and transformed the human mind. Once night fell, early humans could no longer hunt, forage, or manufacture tools, leaving them with absolutely nothing to do but gather tightly around the glowing embers and look at one another. Anthropologists studying the few remaining traditional hunter-gatherer societies on Earth have uncovered a fascinating contrast between daytime talk and nighttime talk, noting that daytime conversations under the bright sun are almost entirely pragmatic, focusing on survival logistics, economic complaints, and hunting paths. But the moment the night takes over and the firelight is lit, 81% of all conversations shift entirely to storytelling, ancient myths, jokes, and the sharing of cultural history. The cooking fire accidentally created the world's very first theater for the mind, a safe, reliable nighttime venue where human language could evolve past simple coordination and transform into art, philosophy, and religion, allowing complex human culture to accumulate and pass down across thousands of generations while our ancestors sat mesmerized by the flames. It is a beautiful, deeply ironic journey, because in our modern world, the act of cooking has spent the last few decades being quietly villainized by various health movements. Blamed for the rise of ultra-processed foods, empty calories, and the global metabolic crisis, yet the underlying biological mechanism being criticized today is the exact same mechanism that allowed the human brain to triple in size and conquer the planet. The problem was never cooking itself, because cooking remains arguably the single most important nutritional technology our species ever invented, a load-bearing wall of human survival that allowed us to outsource our digestion and free our minds. The modern issue is simply a tragic case of an ancient evolutionary advantage running completely wild in an environment of infinite industrial abundance, where the same biological trick that once barely kept Ice Age humans alive through a lean winter by making starches hyperabsorbable is now available instantly at a drive-through window 24 hours a day. We may never pinpoint the exact fleeting second when a random wildfire turned into a controlled human hearth, but the legacy of that ancient flame is written across every single inch of your body, in the shape of your jaw, the compactness of your gut, and the thoughts running through the massive brain you are using to process this sentence right now. The ancient fire went out a very long time ago, but the transformation it left behind never did.